Hi. I think we were already introduced a bit, but my name is Jeff Eaton. I'm a developer on the Drupal project, and I work for Lullabot, a Drupal consulting company. And I and a number of my coworkers and we've put together the book Using Drupal. It's a hands-on look through building a number of different kinds of websites. Oh,
Jeff,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt so quickly. We've had a couple comments that your voice and James are a little quiet, so perhaps you'll want to move your headsets closer to your mouth and speak up just a bit.
Ah, okay. Is this any better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Good times. Just getting all the technical bits sorted out. But yeah, my name is Jeff Eaton. I'm a developer on the Drupal project. I've been working with it for a number of years, and we've put out this book Using Drupal, and today we're going to be giving sort of a gentle introduction to the Drupal content management framework. We can't answer every single question about Drupal, obviously, so everything you ever wanted to know may be over-promising just a bit, but I hope you'll come away from this with some really useful information and a better understanding of how the system works and how you can leverage it effectively. James, do you want to give a hello? Or?
Sure. Hey, everybody. This is James, James Walker. I'm also a longtime Drupal developer. Been developing for 20 years or so, and yeah, we have spent the past year working on using Drupal, and as our work with Lullabot, we spend a lot of time teaching Drupal and answering Drupal questions. So we've got a presentation here, about 30 minutes, sort of the first half of the hour, that we'll do the presentation for, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So as Catherine said off the top, ask your questions, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as possible. So welcome, everybody, and let's go. Cool.
And one more time, if you gentlemen could please concentrate on speaking loudly. We've had a few requests. Thanks.
Okay. Got it. So the first point here is if you're here, you probably know a little bit about Drupal. But for anybody who's still catching up, what is Drupal? It's a web application written in PHP that manages a website's content. It has thousands of different plugins written by third-party developers who had an itch to scratch and wanted to add new features. It's skinnable by designers, so how it actually appears to an end user looking at your website can be customized to your heart's content. It's 100% free. It's open source, which means that you can download it, change it, give it away, collect it and trade it with your friends, whatever you like. It's done by volunteers and professionals who use it in their work and just want to keep enhancing it and making it better. So, what's not to love? Drupal's history is long and storied by web standards. It was originally built in 2000 as an internal project by some college students in Belgium. Dries Boytaert, the current head of the Drupal project, was one of those students, and he and a number of people that he shared a dorm with needed some sort of tool to coordinate information that they were sharing with each other, and they also had a shared internet connection that they wanted to make better use of. So they built this web application that they ended up using among themselves, and it ended up becoming sort of their test bed for playing with new web technologies and experimenting with new ways of approaching solving these kind of community organizing problems with technology. It was released as open source software in 2001, and it started accumulating other developers who were interested in using it and enhancing it and tinkering with it on their own projects. One of the big inflection points for Drupal came in 2004 when Howard Dean's presidential campaign used it as the basis for a tool they called Dean Space that they made sort of a ready-to-go build your own Howard Dean campaign website kit for campaign volunteers that they could just, put out to people and they could roll out a new website without having a dedicated team of tech experts or anything like that. There was a lot of energy and a lot of development work that went into it there, and a lot of people who are now sort of the gray-bearded elders of the Drupal community really got involved during that period of time when they dove in and did all that work. Today, it's used on, I don't think there's a specific count, but trillions of sites is what I tend to say. James, I know you've been with the Drupal project for a lot longer than me, even.
Yeah, so there's a couple things to keep a note, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the back channel here. But one of the things is that sort of the history and the birthplace, if you will, of Drupal was really in sharing information and having a large number of of contributors sharing ideas and thoughts, essentially writing what we now call blog posts and things like that, updates. And so that's really, when we talk about Drupal as a content management system, it's also a very sort of social system. So a lot of the sites that build have, social networking components and tend to be multi-user systems with lots and lots of, people participating, either posting content or comments, things like that. And yes, no, it's tough to say. We say trillions of sites running Drupal because, like so much of free software, it's tough to say how many sites are actually running Drupal. We certainly keep track of a lot of the most prominent ones. Certainly anything that we hear about explicitly. But it is free software. It's licensed under the GPL. People are free to download Drupal and set it up on their public web server, on internal web servers, etc. So what we see sort of scrolling by now is a collection of just a handful of sites. One of the things you may notice, though, is that they're fairly prominent sites. So Drupal, particularly over the last year or two, has really sort of hit a plateau or broken into the mainstream. And so people like Amnesty International that we saw early, Popular Science Magazine, who doesn't love Ozzy? So big record labels, publishing companies, all these have sort of noticed Drupal and are using them for either parts of their website or their entire sort of web infrastructure. So
and on the flip side, my mom's blog also runs on Drupal.
And Jeff's mom's blog, yeah. So it's a mature package. It's been around again for 8 years now, and is used all over. And of course, who doesn't love the onion?
There were a couple of questions. One thing that I had meant to mention, it's Drupal. It's like Drew Carey and pull, as in I'm pulling something. Drupal. That's the official canonized pronunciation, so we can finally end that debate once and for all. But as James mentioned, there are a lot of websites that are using it. It tends to be very popular now with sites that have a large social component, where it's not just a publisher pushing out information, but there's a lot of interaction with users who are coming onto the site and either commenting on content, rating it, interacting with it in some way, or actually creating the content themselves. Sites like The Onion, Ozzy Osbourne's website, Britney Spears' website, Sony Music, for example, is using Drupal as the basis for all of their individual artist websites. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on, just rolling out large systems. But then it's also, because of its history and its roots in just organizing smaller groups of people and coordinating them using web technology, it's also got a strong following just in small groups that need to put up a site to, help collaborate about a project or to put out information about a local Boy Scout troop. Almost anything that you look at, somebody's out there building a Drupal site with it. One of the things that we wanted to do very briefly is take a brief trip back memory lane. In the olden days when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we had simple stuff like straight XML or straight HTML files sitting on a web server. That when someone requested a web page, what they were getting was an actual downloaded HTML file from the server. And this was good. It was fine. Until you started having, 100, 1,000 pages or something like that. And suddenly managing all this stuff became really, really burdensome. The next sort of developmental phase was the evolution of programs like, guest book managers or news scripts that could run on the web server. And when someone requested today's news, the script was responsible for gathering stuff from a database. Or when someone said, I want to, put my name on your guest book, there was a little guest book program that would record that information. When someone came to view it, it would display all of those recorded guest book entries. This saved a lot of work because webmasters didn't have to go through and manually update things and keep everything in sync. The downside was eventually you ended up getting something that was almost as complex as all of the static files because you were juggling a bunch of different scripts. They had maybe written in different programming languages and stitching them together into a cohesive whole, a single website, was still a challenge. Sort of the magical wonderland, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting closer, is the idea of web applications, a central system that handles all of the functionality and content for a site. Things like Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, lots of systems like that all operate under this idea. The fact that you can hit the website and there's one piece of software that's pulling all of the information together and presenting it. And that's Drupal, with our happy little hamster running around a wheel. The last moment for the presentation. And how Drupal works under the hood is a lot like what we described. Instead of there being a bunch of different scripts scattered around on the web server, there's just one, Drupal's main index file. When a user requests something from the web server, say a given user's profile page or a given blog entry or something like that, Drupal says, okay, that's cool. I'm handling all requests for this website. What was that URL that you wanted? Then what it does is it says that URL that you requested, somewhere there's a plugin or a module that was installed that says that it is capable of handling that URL. For example, if someone goes to the URL blog/1, they're asking for user number 1's blog. And the blog module that comes with Drupal has announced that it can handle that URL. So it's responsible for building the contents of that page. After it's built up the blog for user number 1, it hands it back to the central Drupal system. Then Drupal handles things like adding sidebar blocks, navigation menus, user login forms, stuff like that. Drupal, the system, its job is to keep track of all of the environment. Who's the user that's currently logged on? What time is it? Do they have permissions to do certain things? What portions of the site should they have access to? Then these plugin modules are responsible for when a user with the correct permissions says, I want a particular piece of information, the module builds it up, hands it off. And then the third piece is the theme. In Drupal, it's the portion that takes all the information assembled by these modules and by Drupal and turns that into actual HTML. And that's the part that allows, say, Sony to create a website that looks like Ozzy Osbourne with flying bats and Gothic typeface, and Amnesty International can put a different theme on top of it. And using a lot of the same tools underneath the hood, their theme can make it look very, very different. And then after all that stuff happens on the site, or on the server, the HTML gets handed back to the user, just as if it had been a static web page that you built in Dreamweaver or something like that, but it's all happening dynamically, and you can drive tons and tons of content and tons of interactivity without actually going in there and manually hacking everything up in HTML yourself. James, did I hear you?
Yeah, there's a couple things to note here. So, what we're looking at here is the general flow, but really this is the architecture of Drupal. So everything is centrally handled. Those of you that are come from a development background, we've got essentially a main controller, front side controller that's handling all requests and gating that. So we don't have you know, lots of little scripts sprinkled around. We've got sort of one central control. Everything comes in. It is a PHP script, and that sort of maintains and dispatches between the request that comes in and the code that is responsible for generating the result. And then as that walks through, that content gets built up, and then it's sort of handed back to the main core system, which then you know, wraps the additional information and layers on what's called the theme. The theme is where you have full control over what the design and ultimately the HTML and the markup that's sent to the browser is. So so it's sort of a full cycle that you get lots of sort of developmental control over what's happening and how the system is behaving.
Okay. We've got a bit of an illustration here. There's Drupal core, the underlying stuff like search system, security, login, the modules that are added on to add features, users that can be defined with specific permissions, content that those users create, views of content by modules like the blog system or calendar or photo gallery, and then the theme on top of that. The next question that I think came up a lot was how Drupal compares to different systems that do similar stuff. The easiest way to break this down is first into just web development frameworks, things like Ruby on Rails, Django for the Python lovers in the audience, Cake PHP. These are tools that give programmers and developers a sort of toolbox full of helpful utilities and sort of pre-made pieces to assemble their own custom web application from. Things like what should happen when someone hits the server and requests a page. That's all still up to the developer working with one of these systems. They have a lot of useful things already baked in, but it's still very much, you know, starting from the foundation, and you're writing all of it in code yourself. The other side of the spectrum is systems like, say, Movable Type or WordPress or Moodle, if you're familiar with education stuff. These are web applications that are focused on very specific kinds of sites, things like blogging or putting together a photo gallery or doing testing and quizzes for students online. These tend to be simpler to set up just because they're focused on a specific task, and there's less decision-making involved for someone who's setting up the site because it's already a blogging application or it's already a student services management application. These are sort of turnkey web applications. In the middle are systems like Drupal and Joomla and Clone, as someone mentioned. These are content management systems. The idea is that they provide functionality out of the box. They let you log in, hit the web page, create a user account, create new pieces of content, but they rely heavily on additional plugins and third-party modules to add additional features. So you start with something that's usable. It's not as polished and hyper-focused as something like WordPress, but at the same time, you're not starting from ground zero the way you are developing something from scratch in, say, Rails or whatever. A lot of people have actually asked how Drupal and Joomla differ from each other. A lot of that is cultural. In Drupal, there's a heavy emphasis on the plugin modules that are used, providing smaller, more granular pieces of functionality. For example, it's very rare that you would download an image gallery plugin in Drupal. What you would download is a tool that lets you upload images, and then you would download another tool that lets you organize posts that you've made that match certain criteria in a grid, and then another one that lets you override the breadcrumb trail and how the structure of the site is presented. And by assembling those things together, what you would get is an image gallery. But the idea is that you have more control over that. And by breaking it down into those smaller pieces, a lot of those things can be reused. The example that was mentioned, like presenting things in a gallery-style display, Because those are broken down into smaller pieces in the Drupal world, you could just as easily create, say, a delicious-style website where there are lists of links that people have archived, that thumbnails of each web page are shown in a gallery just as if they'd uploaded images, but those are actually links to external sites. And those would use a lot of the same software under the hood because you've used different plugins to assemble that functionality rather than downloading a single monolithic plugin for image galleries or link galleries or something like that. That difference is probably one of the biggest between Joomla and Drupal. It's not so much a technical difference as a cultural one. There's a much stronger emphasis on large turnkey plugins for Joomla. I'm not an experienced Joomla developer, but I do interact with various Joomla developers fairly frequently, and I try to keep up on what's going on in the community. And I'd say that's probably an accurate statement. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that. I know that you've worked with a number of other frameworks and may have some other points of comparison, James. But
yeah, I think the one thing to keep in mind in sort of where Drupal fits is, you know, the reason we brought up things like Rails and Cake PHP is because you know, these are sort of one approach to site building. A lot of rapid tools for developers, and Drupal has, you know, APIs and tools for developers, you know, a modular architecture. But it also comes with, you know, an application, a content management system that you can just install and begin using. So the contrast then to things like WordPress are that, you know, WordPress is a blogging application. It's designed to, you know, you install it and it does something, and it does something very well. But it's not sort of built with the same consideration to being flexible and being general purpose. So these systems more like Drupal and Joomla are then somewhere in the middle, or actually both, right? Where they have there is an application and there's plugins where you can build all kinds of things with them out of the box, and I can see lists of add-on modules scrolling by. So there's lots of stuff that you can do without writing code, and yet there's still that development framework underneath where you can, you know, write additional modules, provide additional extensions, and if there's something that doesn't exist out there that you want to do, as a developer, you have the hooks to tie in and add it in.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the things that has contributed significantly to Drupal's growth. Very early on in its life, it had a plugin system that made it possible for modules not just to add a single feature to Drupal, but also to affect each other. In Drupal, a module that, say, provides an input form for someone to enter in information, another module can come in and add a second field to that form that wasn't there to begin with, and add on its own processing sort of as a tag-along on the end of that. There's a high level of interconnection between Drupal modules, and that's why, although they tend to be smaller and provide more focused functionality, there's a big emphasis on them working together to provide sort of aggregate functionality. One of the other big pieces that Drupal brings to the table is the way it approaches content. Nodes are a term that you'll find a lot in Drupal. That's basically just a discrete piece of content that's available on the website. It has a title, it has a body, it has a type, like a blog post, calendar event, picture, something like that. The idea is that there can be many different kinds of discrete content on a site. Plugin modules can define their own custom content types. For example, an event module could say, I want to have an event content type. And then users can have permissions to create and manage different kinds of content. So an editor, for example, might be put into the editor role on a Drupal site and be given permission to only create stories, while say the publisher may be given permission to create full-fledged standalone pages on the site that aren't attached to any specific news event. Each different kind of content can be given different permissions, and more importantly, can also have different properties. For example, if you had a photo content type, you wouldn't just want a title and body, you would actually want a file upload field to be a part of that content inherently, so that whenever someone creates a piece of photo content, they actually have to attach a file to it. It's an image file. As modules define custom content types, they can also define the different kinds of properties that are associated with them. Event content types, for example, would probably have a start date, end date, a location. Polls. There's a poll module that comes with Drupal out of the box. It allows you to enter in different questions on the poll, and then visitors who come can vote on each one of those different questions and say, which one is the winner, stuff like that. But those discrete questions are actually attributes of that poll as a type of content, in the same way that the picture is an attribute of the photo content type that was uploaded. This idea of breaking down all of the content into different types with different properties is a really big difference. There are a number of plugins out there for things like for systems like WordPress that allow you to just add random metadata to a blog post. So you could say, I want the Amazon product associated with this to be a particular product code. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can do things like, I want to require any post in the books section to have at least 2 Amazon products associated with it. The fact that this metadata that gets associated with each content type is explicitly coded by modules and is defined as an implicit part of the content type means that there's a lot of smart handling that Drupal can do, like validation or providing intelligent display based on what's entered in and stuff like that without users having to go in and hack it up in the display layer. Like saying, okay, if I'm about to display a post and it happens to have a book associated with it, do something different. Modules that define the content types can already provide the intelligence to format things differently if there are different kinds of posts. It's also useful when there are a large number of people interacting with the site, posting content, because different permissions can be given to all of these different content types out of the box. That the rich permission system is also one of the features that tends to set Drupal apart. The other part of that is how to show that content. Once you've defined all of the content and what type of content it is and what additional data that it has with it, it still just goes into a giant bin. If you've ever logged into a Drupal site, the front page looks not very different from a blog when you first log on. It's just the latest 10 posts displayed in reverse chronological order. As we mentioned earlier, modules can say, I'm responsible for a particular URL on the site. I'll build the content of that page when users visit it. That's how a lot of different displays of information in Drupal get handled. There's a screenshot here in the presentation that shows a couple of different views of things. There's a recent posts list that displays things in tabular order that comes with Drupal. There are also calendar modules that display things in a table and show things by month instead of just in chronological order as in a list. The blog module organizes things by user and by date and lets you drill down via the URL and via links to filter things. The idea here is that by default, all of those different pieces of content get dumped into a big bin in your website, and Drupal doesn't make any assumptions on how you want to structure that or how you want to organize it. Different plugin modules like blog or calendar or forum, they make different decisions about how things get structured, how things get displayed. And you as the site administrator use these plugin modules to determine sort of how you want to divide up the giant soup of content into the structure of your site. Examples of some of the more flexible modules that come with Drupal are taxonomy. It allows you to just associate keywords with content, sort of like the category system in WordPress. You can define different categories. It also lets you do sort of Flickr-style free tagging of keywords. And then once that information is associated with different pieces of content, it automatically generates listing pages for things that are tagged with different pieces of content. You can say, pull up a page of everything that was posted in the news section and was tagged with local, stuff like that. Wiki, that's even easier because there isn't really any organization per se. Well, that's not quite true. But building a wiki in Drupal is a matter of, say, creating a content type that has content filters on it that allow you to do the wiki links from page to page, giving very open permissions to allow almost anyone to edit the page, rather than the strict permissions you might have on, say, a news site, and then just allowing the structure of the site to happen organically. In that sense, Drupal's put everything into a big bin philosophy maps very, very well to the wiki organizational structure. Let's see. The second part of that is what happens if there isn't a module that just provides some sort of out-of-the-box solution to how you want to display things or what type of content you want. What if what you want is, say, a concert as a particular type of content, and you're making a venue website. You're going to need things like what band is playing, where is it, what's the price, what time does it start, stuff like that. The great news is that Drupal allows you to create your own custom content types just out of the box. There's also a third-party module called CCK, Content Construction Kit, that allows you to add custom fields to any type of content and set up validation rules, presentation styles, things like that. So you can say, I want an address field on there. I want it displayed as a Google map. I want a date field. I want it displayed as just AM, PM time. And I want a currency field that says, how much the concert costs. And then I want a link to another node that another node of content that I have on the site that's a description of the band that's playing. So you can even set up relationships between different kinds of content with CCK so that you can build clouds of information, like a band as one type of content, an album as another type of content, and an individual track as another type of content. And using node references, you could tie all of these things together. And again, because these modules are defining those as inherent properties of those types of content, you can do things like validate that and set up rules around how they get displayed. And then the second part is using the views module, you can build your own custom listings to present that content however you'd like in a calendar or in a glossary-style navigation view, even if there's not already a third-party module out there that's sort of canned and presents it in a particular way. These two modules, CCK and Views, are really becoming the heart of a lot of Drupal sites because they're so flexible and they allow you to sort of look at the mock-ups that you have of your website, say, what types of content do I have in here, what fields do they need, and what ways do I want to present those pieces of content. And using CCK and Views, you can translate the answers to those kinds of questions almost directly into just Drupal configuration stuff. And then, in addition, there are tons of other third-party modules that add random stuff like voting, content, RSS feed aggregation, stuff like that. There are a lot of modules. If you want to pull in information from Amazon to build your own shopping cart, there's stuff out there. Multilingual translation, voting and rating, e-commerce. But all of these modules tend to revolve around the same basic concept. Drupal handles authentication, rendering things to HTML. A module takes responsibility for particular URLs on the website. Pieces of content in the form of nodes form the backbone of most of the site. Modules define their own custom content types, or you can using a module like CCK. And then there are different views of that content that you use to sort of carve the structure of the meat of your website out of that big undifferentiated pool of content. That's pretty much the canned portion of the presentation. We wanted to jump into questions as soon as we can. I know that for people who are very experienced with Drupal, or even reasonably experienced, a lot of this has been reviewed, but we wanted to sort of establish the baseline before we tried to jump into any questions, because it's very easy to get very deep into the rabbit hole of Drupal geekiness once the Q&A starts. Is there anything else that we wanted to hit on before we dove into that?
I think we're ready for Q&A.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jeff and James. I have a number of questions, and the audience has been really good about answering each other's questions, so I hope people will forgive me if I cover one that has already been answered in the chat. And so I'm going to jump in with one that Louis Novak brought up. He says that Wikipedia lists 3 criticisms of Drupal. One is lack of object orientation. The second is poor usability and steep initial learning curve. And, oh, those are the first 3. And he would like for you to address those 3 issues.
Boy.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hop in, because so the first one, the lack of object-oriented design, actually was an intentional choice at the beginning. And largely, again, as we mentioned and people have noted in the back channel, Drupal is written in PHP. When Drupal began, PHP was essentially a thin wrapper on top of C, and not really a full object-oriented language. It had some sort of minimal constructs, but actually was very inefficient if you tried to use sort of straight object-oriented paradigms. And so one of the sort of underlying design philosophies from a software architecture perspective is be pragmatic, do what makes sense. And so Drupal from the get-go was done procedural, because that's what PHP did best. As we move forward, so with the next major release of Drupal 7, we're dropping support for PHP 4 and previous, and are already looking at adopting, more object-oriented paradigms as the language has gotten richer.
There are 2 major portions of Drupal that are actually object-oriented. They're not part of Drupal core, but the views module, again, one of those that's so common that I think probably at least 50% of all the Drupal sites that we're gathering statistics on out there are already using views. Views 2.0 is fully object-oriented, so customizing it involves, creating classes and overriding default functions and stuff like that. So that working with views will be very comfortable and familiar for someone who's familiar with object-oriented PHP. In Drupal 7, the database layer that sort of allows us to work with different database systems and protects module developers from having to write custom code for each one. That's all based on PDO, the built-in database abstraction system in PHP 5, and it's object-oriented as well. So there's a slow process of migrating internals in Drupal towards object orientation where it makes sense, but there hasn't been any sort of big, okay, let's just take the next year, rewrite Drupal in object-oriented code, just for the heck of it. It's been a very pragmatic approach.
Yeah. So the other 2 were usability is definitely a focus. It has been a concern in Drupal and has been a focus for the last couple of releases. And it's getting better. It's certainly not perfect yet. It's true of sort of several free software packages. It started as something that was serving the needs of largely its authors. As it's grown, the sort of pain points have been identified, and there are several organizations who have conducted full usability, proper usability studies of Drupal, and will continue to do so. And each of those, usability has for the last few releases been a primary target for improvement and for changes, and it continues to improve release by release. There's lots of work there, and I believe the last one was the learning curve, and I mean the learning curve is probably the pain point that's nearest and dearest to Lullabot's heart. That's the one we go after directly. So we do, we've got an upcoming training seminar in New Orleans next week, and we did run workshops. We wrote the book using Drupal largely because there is sort of a process of understanding Drupal, getting into how it works and how to essentially make use of it effectively. And so, I mean, that's certainly what we do. And a lot of the materials that we put out on our site, the articles and information there, is to help teach people. And there's, again, that's another thing that's sort of already been identified by the community and has lots of work going. There's been several initiatives to, to clean up the online documentation on Drupal.org. There's a project called the Drupal Dojo, which is sort of geared strictly at focusing on those new users. So.
Okay.
And again, a lot of it's just a matter of people coming up to speed with the concepts that Drupal uses to structure sites. Some of these ideas like nodes, and there is no default structure for your website. You just sort of build it as you desire using views or modules that provide, custom pages. That can be a very unfamiliar approach for someone who's used to a more traditional site structure background. And making sense of that first can help before just diving in and trying to wrangle a website.
Okay. I want to mention again for the attendees of this presentation that it's originally scheduled for 1 hour, and I know that most people can only take an hour off in the middle of the day, but Jeff and James have agreed to go longer and answer more questions, so you're welcome to stay on if you can. And I know that we can't get to all of the questions, but we'll do our best. And so I'm going to go back to some of the earlier questions, and they sort of jump around, so let's just take a stab at them. One gentleman asked, if I have some of my own scripts written in PHP and JavaScript, can I add them to Drupal, or do I have to remake them as Drupal modules?
You can, well, you will have to remake them as Drupal modules, but that doesn't necessarily have to be something painful, depending on the type of script and the complexity of it. Because a Drupal module, at its simplest, is just something that says, hey, Drupal, when somebody asks for a particular URL on the website, I want to build the content for that URL. It can be as simple as writing a wrapper around your existing script that takes that incoming request from Drupal and spits out the content that you would have normally built. Now, doing just that will probably not leverage the capabilities of Drupal. For example, if you're building input forms for users, Drupal has a full developer API for building and validating and processing forms that gives you, rolled-in protection from cross-site request forgery and all kinds of goodness like that. And if you're doing, user verification or something, you'll probably want to then tie into Drupal's user login system and use its permission system rather than rolling your own. But it doesn't have to be a toss everything I've done before and rewrite it from scratch thing if you've got those standalone scripts.
Okay. And some of these questions are pretty specific. One, Calvin is asking, how well do modules survive upgrades at the Drupal core?
That's a good question. Yeah, you want to take this, James?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So one of the development philosophies, again, there's the pragmatism, but also, a real focus on keeping the code optimal, and so there's not a lot of time spent towards maintaining legacy code. So as a developer, there can be some attrition then in the modules. So if a new release of Drupal comes out and there are API changes that happen, then a module developer actually has to do some work to port it forward to make sure it works with the new version. That can be a hassle for developers, certainly, depending on sort of how hard you're hit by the API changes. But another sort of the flip side of that coin is it does keep things fresh. And a lot of times what happens is, we see things like, these CCK and views add-ons that are very robust and general purpose sort of rise up out of a bunch of other approaches. So particularly with the last couple of releases, Drupal's seen sort of a consolidation of a lot of features into a smaller number of more general purpose modules, and CCK and views are the prime example of those. And then, so what happens then is most of the other modules in integration are much smaller pieces of functionality, and so so you're upgrading just one feature, just rendering a calendar display as opposed to an entire event management system.
Okay, good. And we have a lot of specific questions. I think people really want answers to these. For instance, Jacob is asking, can you integrate an existing JSP application with Drupal? And he says, ideally, Drupal would be the main application and wrap calls to the JSP application.
That's definitely into the hardcore geekery with Drupal. I say this as a dedicated Drupal geek. That's probably not something that will be Drupal specific. That's just going to be a matter of trying to get a PHP web application to talk cleanly to a JSP application. Working with Drupal probably won't present any more hassles in doing that than working with any other PHP web app. It's just going to be the inherent difficulty of trying to sync up two different frameworks in two different languages and get them speaking nicely to each other. Without too many more specifics, I don't think I can go into a lot of detail, but it's probably going to be thorny no matter what direction you approach that from.
Yeah, any integration depends on both sides of that equation. So it is certainly theoretically possible. There's a couple of different ways to integrate. You can, if it's just the data in a database from another system, there are built-in features in Drupal to maintain multiple DB connections. So if you need to open up a connection to another database, make that connection, pull some data, close it down and flip back. That stuff's sort of accounted for. Probably the most common, sort of cross-language or cross-platform integration would be to use, use a web services layer, use a REST API or XML-RPC or something like that to communicate between the two.
And you can either write that custom or use there's a module called services that can automatically expose REST and XML-RPC web services for things like retrieving the contents of a view or adding or retrieving individual nodes or user accounts and stuff like that in Drupal. So there's a lot of work around making those access points available.
Okay, fair enough. John is asking, is there a good way to preview configuration or template changes before going live?
Our traditional approach to that is to have two copies of the website. One that you tinker with locally, and then when you know you want to put it live, you push it out. That doesn't always work, but for doing simple stuff, obviously Drupal allows you to have unpublished content, so you can write stuff up, put it up on and online, and allow editorial review and stuff like that before it actually goes live. For themes, if you're doing development of a custom theme, it's possible to allow just administrators or just people in a particular role to choose between two themes. So you could say that everyone on the site comes in and sees the default theme, but I'm going to allow a specific small group of users to go to their account page and choose the in-progress testing theme so that we can try things out. Other than that, it's pretty much just the same problems you face trying to do any kind of web development on a live running website. It's tread very carefully or do it on a test site.
Okay. And let me pick the next one here. One person is asking, I think this is from Peter, how do I roll back a site to a given date?
Very simply, use version control as much as you can, and so certainly with the code. In fact, when we work with clients in consulting engagements, or when we meet random people on the street, we encourage them strongly to use something like Subversion, use a version control system, and that way, you'll have the ability to roll back all of the code, not only which Drupal version you're using, as well as any custom theming you've done or custom modules that you've written. That'll all be under control. So that sort of gets you most of that snapshot in time stuff. The other portion then is all of the data that's in the database. And there's a couple of options there. If you're worried about just certain nodes or certain pieces of content, any content in Drupal can be versioned. So like Wikipedia or any sort of system where you can go back and see a given article or something from a specific date and time. That's built in. If you want a full, exactly, every setting, et cetera, as it was, probably the most reliable thing is just to keep, regular database backups. And, you can also keep them in your version control system as well, so that then you have, for any date and time, you can roll back to exactly all of the code running as it was and the database as it was at that time.
Oh, good. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to help this person. Veronica's asking, and it may have been answered in the chat, how to get her Google Analytics working again after a Drupal install. Is that a known problem?
I know there's a module called, incidentally, Google Analytics that provides a bunch of features around integrating Google Analytics with your site. So, but essentially, Google Analytics is essentially a snippet of JavaScript code. Now, probably if you're not using the Google Analytics module, that probably needs to go in your theme or somewhere so that it's actually showing up on the page. The Google Analytics module is very nice because essentially you put in your analytics code and it takes care of putting that JavaScript on the page for you and give you some controls around, don't collect analytics for the admin user or from the admin section and things like that. So, and I see the link flying by in the chat. So
yeah.
Check that out.
And that's actually a good example of something that we talked about in the presentation, of Drupal plugin modules being able to do more than just provide a page or something like that. In the case of Google Analytics, once you enter your settings into the Google Analytics module, it actually adds a small and visible snippet of JavaScript to each page behind the scenes. So that's another example of all those modules sort of interacting with each other.
Okay, good. Let me see, I had a design question here. Yes, Stephen is saying the basic visual design of many Drupal-based sites is very columns and rectangular blocks of content, and he wants to know what can be done to loosen up the look and feel of a Drupal-based site.
So I see Jeff Robbins from Lullabot is lurking in the channel, so he can start throwing in all kinds of examples of other sites that don't look that column view. One of the things that is, the theming layer that we talked about, literally all of the HTML that goes, to the browser is passed through this theming layer. So, the sort of trite answer is, well, you can do whatever.
Did you say the steaming layer?
The theming layer. Sorry, T-H.
Oh, okay.
Theming.
Thanks.
Although some people may argue that it is theming, but
okay.
Yeah. So this theme layer gives you access to all of that HTML before it's rendered. So you can completely override and make your Drupal site look like whatever you want it to look like. The thing is that so that's been true sort of forever in Drupal. What's been evolving over the last few releases is how easy that is to do. And the answer is Drupal 6, the current major release, was actually a huge step forward in how easy that is to use. And the simplifications coming in specifically around limiting the amount of actual PHP code that you need to write to do those overrides. Traditionally it's been a lot of sort of PHP function writing and variable manipulation. And now, for most cases, it's as simple as dropping, largely HTML template files into your theme and tweaking the markup as necessary. So the short answer is you can make your site look like whatever. The slightly longer answer is
one tip that I'd probably say is that a lot of Drupal themes end up looking very column, center content column, that sort of 3-column approach. because that's a very, very common kind of layout on the web right now. The other point is that Drupal provides certain default navigation menus and administrative tools and stuff like that. So if someone is just wanting to drop in a theme and start using their website without much customization, it's a lot safer to provide that sort of basic structure. But again, if what you want is a single web page that has no navigation around it, and there's flash flyover menus and stuff like that, all of that can still be done through the theming system. There are a couple of really great links. Maybe one of the other people on the channel can check it out. I think Pete Droge is an artist who made an amazing band website that's pure Flash in terms of what the end user sees, but it's all being generated by the Drupal theming system. So, I mean, if you want to, you can really go all out. It's just a matter of planning your design, executing it, and then using the Drupal theming layer to spit out the proper information. It's really a design question more than a Drupal capability question. There are always certain small hitches that you can run into, things like wanting to customize one little bit here or there that takes a little more work than you'd like. But at a high level, the sky really is the limit.
Okay, good. Now here's a more technical question that came up early in the webcast, and the person asking said, we frequently use views, but I don't understand how views variables get configured. For instance, the node, the $node is set, but minimally, and I wind up using, he says, the node _ load parens a lot, but I wonder if I'm missing something that's more efficient or a best practice.
Yeah, so I actually saw that one, but before the chat window went crazy on us, I actually saw that. So views, the best way to think of how views is working underneath is to think of it as a database query builder. And essentially, when you're using the views module and building up all the, the list of things that you want to retrieve, what views is doing underneath is generating a database query that will get you the result set. So one of the things to keep in mind, and I'm going to guess what's probably happening in this specific case, is if you're using views to say, I only want certain fields from a node, so I only want the title and the body, what views will do is load just that information, because one of the things it's trying to do is be as performant, to be as fast about it as possible. So if you say I only want the title and the body, it'll only give you the title and the body. So it's sort of one thing to keep in mind. But if it helps, which it helps for me, how I think of views is it's just generating a database query. So I'm going to get the fields from the database that I've asked for. I'm going to get only the number that I've asked for, and things like that. So if there's anything else, you need to actually add it in to your view.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks for answering that. And here's one. One, Robert is saying that he thinks that Drupal's very cool for building new applications from the ground up, but what about existing applications or database schemas? He says it seems to be daunting and very difficult to integrate the old application the old application to Drupal.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Any kind of transition from an old system to a new system is going to be tricky. There are a couple of different ways to do that. The one that's really common inside of the Drupal world is to use the CCK module to go through and create content types and create fields on those content types that map to the kind of database schema that you were previously using. The idea is if you had a table full of events, then you would create an event content type and add fields that map to the different columns you have. The difference there, though, is that CCK and the guts of that module will still be figuring out what your database schema should actually look like based on information that you enter in on the, in the user interface. So there's not going to be necessarily a direct correlation between your old database schema and your new one. As things have progressed, there are a couple of different approaches to solving that. One is do it that way, export all of your old information, and use modules like, and there's a whole section on the Drupal.org website for import and export modules that allow you to pull in things like, XML files or stuff like that and import them into nodes on your Drupal site. Another approach, you can write a module that exposes its own custom content type without using the CCK module, and just loads in information from your old database schema using SQL that you write, and then displays it whenever a node of the type that you're wanting to display is shown to the user. You can take over the whole process of linking Drupal with your old database schema. The views module can also be expanded. Any database tables that you have in your database, views can be told about what the structure of those tables is, how they relate to other tables in your database, and what the individual columns are and how they relate to each other, so that you can then use the views module to build, say, listing pages of information from a table that another web application entirely is actually populating on your site. So there's a lot of different ways to approach that. None of them are particularly simple, just because the process of migrating from an old, especially a hand-rolled system, to a new one, can be daunting. But there are definitely different approaches that you can take. And which one to go with usually depends on the specifics of how you want to move forward, what your data looks like and what your needs are.
Okay. Joel was asking about setting up e-commerce sites with Drupal and wants to know if it's the path has been pretty well trodden, that is, worked out and documented.
Yeah, there have been two paths trotted out and documented, and personally, I think this is one of the fun phenomena in free software, is that Drupal actually has, in addition to some integration with other packages like OS Commerce, Drupal actually has two sort of fully featured e-commerce systems within, or sort of available as modules. So there's one called e-commerce, easily enough, and the other one is called UberCart. And they take sort of slightly different approaches. It's actually, in using Drupal, in the book, there's actually a chapter sort of devoted to e-commerce and building an e-commerce site with Drupal that does talk about some of the differences between the two. But yes, it's doable and sort of has been done. Both the e-commerce package and UberCart have their own sort of extensive documentation on how to use them and make the most use, the best use of them. And outside of that, so those are both sort of shopping carts and full. They have all kinds of features, like if you're selling downloadable files or recurring subscriptions or all kinds of things. Both of those packages accommodate those. And then there's a whole slew of things for simple, if you want to just accept a PayPal payment for, sort of one-off things and all kinds of other options. So, yeah, but generally for e-commerce, it's either UberCart or the e-commerce package.
Okay. Let's see. Another question is about high volume sites. Do you have any good resources or words of wisdom on optimizing for high volume sites and identifying the robust modules that can be friendly to resources and high volumes?
That's a really excellent question. The Drupal is pretty well optimized to be able to scale effectively. It has a lot of built-in caching features, so that everything from individual, blocks on the page, like what recent posts have just been made, to the entire full content of a page can all be cached and pre-rendered, so that anonymous visitors to the website get a pre-rendered page and it doesn't have to be built from scratch again. But there are a whole suite of different approaches. One of the ones that we've found really effective on sites like Fast Company and Sony BMG's websites is the use of Memcache. It's another open source tool that allows you to have a box on your network that just holds a bunch of RAM and pre-caches lots of information so that the database never has to get hit, and it's just pulling it from RAM. That's definitely like one of the higher end approaches, but that's certainly there for what the really large traffic websites use. They use content delivery networks to handle their static content like images and videos, CSS files. They use Memcache to reduce load on the database so that the information doesn't have to be looked up constantly. I think the answer is that it's definitely possible to scale Drupal. It's been done. But it's also a matter of avoiding hotspot modules. There are certain ones that are surprising. Ones that we've had issues with in the past are like one module that generates little tag clouds of what are the most popular terms. For a long time that ended up being a hotspot on sites that have lots and lots and lots of content because there was just so much that query had to go through. That's the kind of stuff that Drupal's caching system can help smooth out. On groups.drupal.org, it's sort of a giant collaborative social site for the Drupal community. There are a number of different groups dedicated to performance and scalability discussion and finding different modules that are good/bad for when you're trying to scale your site. I would definitely say hitting groups.drupal.org and checking that out would be a great way to go. A lot of times what constitutes a slow spot for your website is really dependent on what kind of usage patterns are there for the website. On one that we helped build, everything was running smooth as silk except for searching because they had about 1 million pieces of content, and one of the biggest killer features for their users was being able to go through and do all kinds of faceted search on the content. And it was just putting way more load on the system than any of the other portions of it combined. So that was what we ended up just focusing a lot of energy on and trying to optimize that. And now they're looking at using the Apache Solar module that is available for Drupal to offload more of the work onto a separate search server. So a lot of those things are there. If you're just using, say, like shared hosting or a single server or something like that, and you're not necessarily looking at spinning up a web farm or something, great tips are to turn on page caching in the Drupal performance configuration page and turn on CSS aggregation. Both of those things just do a great job of reducing the amount of work that Drupal has to do to build a page when an anonymous visitor just comes by and looks at your page for the first time. It can have a really, really big impact on performance, turning those features on.
Okay.
I'd just throw one last thing. It's a huge topic, performance and scalability of Drupal sites. The only last thing I would throw in is that a lot of it tends to come down to the underlying, the LAMP stack or the infrastructure underneath your Drupal site. So Jeff mentioned things like Memcache and a lot of the stuff that that gets used on real high-end sites. But simple things like using a PHP opcode cache and things like that, and some simple MySQL configuration tweaks can usually, give a huge boost, sort of a nice, cheap, easy win in performance. So don't forget underneath Drupal as well.
As a general rule, the database tends to be the single biggest bottleneck for Drupal. It's because it's where Drupal stores a lot of its information, and it dynamically generates the contents of each page. So if you're trying to performance tweak a website, looking at things like the slow query log on your database and making sure that indexes are there for all of the columns that you're filtering or sorting by when you're building a custom view and stuff like that. Those are all really important pieces. If you're using the views module in Drupal 6, a really valuable thing is that you can now preview the exact SQL query that a given view will use behind the scenes, and you can then use that query that views allows you to preview to go into any management tools that you have for your database and say things like, will this query run efficiently? Do I need to add more indexes? Stuff like that. That's a really great addition in Views 2.0 for Drupal 6.
Great. Now here's a question a few people have asked, and it just came in again. Actually, Bob is asking, can a clueless graphics person with a little HTML savvy, and he says CSS, jump right into Drupal and remake a lame public agency intranet? And someone else is asking, is Drupal more for programmers, because he's a designer and wants to know how accessible it is to designers?
Yeah, and so certainly traditionally Drupal's been more about programmers, and you know, Jeff and I are both programmers and not much for designers, so we may be speaking a bit more to that than to the design. But again, the theming, not steaming layer is getting increasingly sort of non-developer friendly. And one of my favorite tricks from Drupal 6 is the fact that you can have a Drupal theme that is just CSS and images. So essentially, the way that Drupal, this theme layer works, is Drupal provides a default markup, how it thinks things should look by default, and that is often debated and is evolving over time to be more and more semantic, more flexible in the default HTML markup that comes out. And so one of the nice things in Drupal 6 is you can use just that default markup for everything and apply your own CSS on top of it. So you don't need to know any PHP code as long as the markup is flexible enough, and for most cases it is. You can just purely with CSS, and images and even some JavaScript, build a theme that alters that look and feel. And so the theming then, if you need the HTML to be different than what Drupal gives you by default, then that's where you start to, first in these template files with HTML, you can override the general structural markup, and then, as I think Jeff said earlier, as you need to go, as you need to get sort of drill down finer and finer onto overrides, that's when you start to bump into some PHP code. But in general, I mean, yes, without a single line of PHP in Drupal 6, you can make your site look completely different.
Well, that's
and, not to put too fine a point on it, the non-programmer, building of websites, that was really what our goal was in using Drupal. The whole point of the book was to go through a bunch of different sort of recipes for building different kinds of websites without writing any code. So that was our goal there. Hopefully we've accomplished that.
Okay, great. Do you guys have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm good for a couple more.
Okay. And everyone appreciated your answering that question, and someone else wanted to jump in and ask, what about, is Drupal also accessible to admins?
Yeah, so one of the things that Drupal does, sort of in contrast to some of its other sort of competitors, I guess, if we use that, but something like Joomla that we talked a lot about before. Joomla has a separate admin interface that you go and you log into the admin site, and that's where you do your configuration and management on that side. Drupal does all of that sort of inline, typically, or by default. So you just go to a different page, and that is your admin interface, and it keeps the same look and feel and theme that the rest of your site does. Now there are configuration options to change that, but that's sort of the default thing. So easy to use for administrators. I mean, that can mean a lot of things, but for one of the confusions can be that your admin interface is going to look like the rest of your site and not like every other Drupal admin interface. So that can be a little bit confusing, particularly when themes start doing things like moving around various bits of navigation and stuff like that. The other confusion for administrators will tend to come based on the number of contributed modules and add-ons and things. Sometimes, the pure flexibility of Drupal can make it complicated because there's lots of different ways you can lay things out, and all of these add-on modules can add, new configuration settings and new new options to, for administrators. And so sometimes keeping track of all of those and understanding where all of those, I would say, would be the biggest administrator hurdle. Okay.
I just want to say we have great participants here today. They're answering all the questions, or a lot of the questions, and it's really very helpful. There are a couple others. Alfonso has asked this in a couple times, so I think he really wants it answered. He says he's asking if more work will be done on separating the database form, business logic, etc., layer code in modules and their methods.
Yeah, I mean, there's already work being done in that. Drupal is moving towards that. It's not super obvious, but already in Drupal 6 there are certain provisions for that. There are helper methods for developers to do things like, here's this object that I have, just save it for me. And Drupal uses the schema API that lets you define tables and columns and data types using metadata to construct the SQL query to do the basic CRUD work for you. So from a developer standpoint, what you're doing is using metadata to define the structure of your, say, a particular type of record that you want to save, and Drupal handles the rest. Things like separating the business logic from presentation is always a little tricky in a web application because ultimately everything has to get to HTML sometimes, so there are some tricky bits. The theming system has traditionally done a pretty good job of splitting Drupal, the guts of how Drupal works and what it's doing from how it gets presented. But as time goes on, with the evolution of Drupal's database layer and the addition of Schema API, and then eventually in Drupal 7 with the addition of PDO and more abstracted database handling, it's a lot more of the separation between business logic and the actual data model is happening as well. So modules don't have to, handle all of their raw SQL, in the same place that they handle enforcing business rules and stuff like that. But it's a slow, gradual process, and part of it is made complicated by the fact that there are so many plugin modules out there that interact with each other in so many different ways that, sometimes an author who comes up with a really great idea and makes a cool little module may not be looking at it in terms of, that kind of explicitly broken down, controller view model. So yeah, it's tricky. It's open source and it evolves as it goes, but it is getting better.
Okay, this is a rather general question, but Kyle has asked it a couple times, so I'll put it to you folks. I'd still like to see a discussion of Drupal as an engine for social networking sites.
I've been watching the back channel on that one. That's an interesting topic because these days, what a social network even is anymore is starting to blur and is blurring daily. It just got blurred yesterday by Google and Facebook. So the answer is, again, and I don't know, maybe I'm getting old, but I like to point back to history. Drupal's birth, Drupal was founded as a social publishing system. So the Google and Facebook yesterday both launched their Friend Connect systems. But yeah, so Drupal sort of has this rich history as, as a community site building thing. And so, multiple users having profiles, have always been part of Drupal core. There are numerous ways to do things, various friend or buddy type relationships, lots of add-on modules. So, and it all comes down to, Drupal's extremely flexible. There are all these modules out there and things. So putting together, however you define social network and putting it together is generally doable in Drupal. And in fact, at the Do It with Drupal seminar that we're running next week in New Orleans, which I've been reminded to shout out. You can use the O'Reilly discount code, just the word O'Reilly, for a discount on that if you want to make last-minute reservations. But one of the things that we're doing at that seminar is something that we've done in the past in our workshops and our training is to take, a popular social network, something like Flickr or Twitter, and we actually build that out in Drupal and show how you would do such a thing with Drupal, which modules to use, and things like that. And that's, that's also one of the things we tried to really focus on in the book is looking at, what modules to use to build these certain types of features. And yes, there was the plug.
Well, it seems like good information to have. There have been so many questions about modules and everything else. Now, do you have time for one more question, or should we call it a day?
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more.
Okay, how about this? Zach is asking if he's asking about filtering content, and so can content be filtered by user group based on certain criteria so that the user group meets? For example, if I have a user group of people from Texas, can I filter content so that they see only what applies to them?
As far as I know, there's not a built-in module that just allows you to drop it in place and do that. But that's, again, where modules like the views come in. Views allows you to filter content based on properties of the currently logged in user and stuff like that. It may be necessary either to write a small custom views plugin or to find someone who's willing to, that allows views to say, look at a particular profile field that you allow users to choose on their user profile, like I'm from Texas. And once views is able to find that particular field using a plugin module or whatever, you could then say, I want to create a view of content that's filtered to the value from the profile of the user that's currently logged on. That's a little abstract as far as an explanation, but an example is one of the views that comes out of the box is the ability to go to a particular page and see the posts that just you have made. Drupal can say, or views can say, if you go to a particular URL and you say, I want all posts by Bob, if I don't say Bob or Jane or whatever in the URL, just show the currently logged in user's posts. The same mechanism can be extended to say, show posts that have the currently logged in user's profile field associated with them, like what state they're from or what their hobbies are. It does require a small amount of custom development to write a plugin that sort of tells views how to get at that, but it's definitely possible. And again, this is the way that sort of the module system works in Drupal. Rather than going through and writing from scratch a system to show geographical content or something like that, what you do is you put these pieces together and then you write glue code that sort of bridges the gap between them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to just add sort of one more thing to that. So views has, this idea of filters that, essentially any module can expose any bit of information, keywords or certain CCK fields can all act as filters for narrowing this view, which again, as Jeff said, you can do per user. The other thing also available is a permission system. So not only if you want to focus content to a specific user, but literally constrain their permission so they can't see things outside of of what they've been given access to. There's also an internal node access system, so our general content permission system, and there's a whole group of modules that allow different kinds of permission filtering on content. The most popular is one called Organic Groups, which runs the previously mentioned groups.drupal.org, where one of the features that it has is not only grouping content together so people post to certain topic areas or whatever, but it can also apply permissions then so that you can only see to the content that's been posted to your group.
Great. Okay, I think we have our audience is getting a little bit silly right now. So, and they're asking about the picture, and I know that's either Jeff or James in this last slide. I'm not sure which one of you it is.
Oh no, that's actually that's the classic 1974 Sears Wishbook catalog.
Ah.
As Angie mentioned in the chat room, for random presentations, I have an 80-gigabyte hard drive full of random ephemera and catalogs that I just pull stuff out of. I'm that guy.
Okay.
Yeah, he's affectionately known as our recap guy. So, yeah.
Okay, great.
So
you guys have been great today. It's been a good presentation. I really appreciate you going over, and it's just been great all around. I want to tell people that there are some questions about the chat, and if you got disconnected or you want the entire chat transcript, send an email to webcast@o'reilly.com. That's WEBCAST, no S on that, so webcast@o'reilly.com, and ask for the chat transcript, and I'll just shoot you a text file with the unedited chat transcript. We've recorded this, and we'll have that available. It'll be a movie file. We'll post it on our site, archive it on our site, and I think maybe Jeff and James will have it on their site, and we will put it on YouTube also. But I'll send you guys an email when it's available.
I'll also be posting these slides on SlideShare.
Wonderful.
So I'm not sure how best to disseminate that, where that goes, but my Twitter name is Eaton, E-A-T-O-N, and I'll tweet that as soon as I put them up on SlideShare.
Okay. And if you want to save the chat yourself, there are two ways you can do it. Go to File, Save, and save the chat. And I think that gives you the file's not very pretty when you open it. Or you can just select all, copy, and paste in your favorite text file. And so I just want to thank everyone, and thank you, Jeff and James. Oh,
Thanks
by the way,
for showing up.
I want to say one more thing. Well, we are planning some more Drupal webcasts. So there's a survey that will present itself once we end this webcast. And if you have some suggestions for what you'd like to hear, just let us know in that survey. Thank you.
Definitely. And thanks, O'Reilly, for hosting this and putting it on.
Absolutely.
We were glad to have you. Bye now.